morning and welcome to the Foggy Dew. This is Colin. Well, gang, I hope everyone had a wonderful 4th of July with their family and friends. I thought that was just an amazing weekend. Just an amazing weekend. We spent our weekend with great friends of ours. We had a ton of laughs, ton of drinks, and we celebrated America. But it was interesting, like the whole weekend, I kept thinking about it like that weekend is just a moment in time. It's an amazing moment. It is something to notice, the 250th anniversary of America. And I kept sitting there the whole day watching all the hoopla, watching the news, watching what was going on around me. Everybody was just so pumped about it. But the thing I kept thinking about was, what does that march to 300 look like? And I'm working on more thoughts around that because it just kept blowing my mind all weekend. Obviously, I'm in the moment. There's America flags everywhere. Where I was at, there was like a ton of Trump flags, Trump country. It's just very pro-America, red, white, and blue. It's so awesome. Everybody's in a great mood. Everybody's partying. It's just so much fun, but I couldn't escape thinking about, what does the next 50 look like? Then what does the next 50 years of America look like? I mean, you're talking July 4th, 2076. I mean, we're limping year to year, it seems like. I mean, do you remember how long 2024 took? 2025? It's like we're crawling forward, but the days go so fast, but the years go so long. And when you start talking about dates like 2076, I mean, wow, man. 2076, I probably won't be alive. Well, I should probably guarantee it I'd be about 100 years old. But I guess my question I kept thinking about, like, I'm looking at the world today, 2026, and I'm watching this amazing celebration. What is the world going to look like in 50 years? I mean, the thing that anybody in living memory can put together is, if you saw 1976, how different is that than 2026? You live in a digital world now. That was an analog world back in the 70s. The world has completely changed. The population exploded. You have the internet. All the things that happened since that, you have AI. All these things are occurring. But anyway, I just kept thinking about the next 50 years, and it's really just kind of blowing my mind. I'm working on some show material around that, so I guess just hang with me. So in the meantime, I guess I had some quick hits that popped up over the weekend that I wanted to address. And I guess the best place to start is I saw something that popped up on Thursday that really, I think, escaped a lot of people's notice. Now, if you'll remember, I talked about it on the show, but what happened in June was that Gavin Newsom had gotten on and started talking publicly about Trump and the Department of Justice. He's sitting here railing on Trump, saying Trump's going after him with the Department of Justice. Hitler's making his move against his political enemies. But here's Gavin Newsom just a month ago. Gavin Newsom is claiming that Trump's Department of Justice was doing a politicized hit job on him. So again, he's railing about Hitler and talking about all this other stuff. And I guess apparently, and I guess shockingly, Newsom was wrong about this whole thing. The Department of Justice has been investigating Newsom since the Biden administration. That's the new news that dropped on Thursday. So there were two criminal investigations by the DOJ before Trump came into office. Those investigations that were surrounding Newsom were from whistleblowers and then from local complaints against his administration. The thing about it is that Gavin Newsom admitted all of that. He admitted all of that information when he went off against Trump just 30 days ago. Part of this investigation is dealing with Gavin Newsom's wife. It's looking at her finances and how they're spending their money from a campaign contribution perspective. But there is all sorts of criminal investigations that are occurring with the Newsoms and their administration. So here you have Gavin Newsom in hot water politically and criminally. And to be fair, it should not be political if the investigation was initiated under Biden. You can't sit there and say that your political enemy is going after you when, in fact, your own party started this investigation. Well, this whole thing about Gavin Newsom railing against the Department of Justice gets even juicier the more this story kind of plays along. So on July 2nd, Thursday, news dropped. Apparently, the FBI had a mole inside of Gavin Newsom's inner circle. That mole was wearing a wire. So you had somebody wired for sound that was inside of the Gavin Newsom administration in California. An FBI mole wired for sound in Gavin Newsom's inner circle in his administration. The timeline on this, again, to refute Gavin Newsom, the timeline, this investigation started in 2024. Well, if it started in 2024, that means it was initiated by Joe Biden, who is a member of Gavin Newsom's political party. Now, who is the mole? The mole is Alexis Podesta. So Alexis Podesta recorded conversations with Gavin Newsom's inner circle. Those conversations led to Gavin Newsom's chief of staff being arrested back in May. So that was the first domino that dropped out of this whole thing. Well, why did this stuff all come out in the news about a mole and an FBI wiretap and all this other stuff? What happened is all of these people in California over the last few weeks, they started getting letters from the FBI. The FBI was sending people letters letting them know that they were part of a criminal investigation. These people were on audio making conversation. They were part of this investigation because they were being recorded by Alexis Podesta. So this Podesta girl got a ton of people on audio, and all of those people are in hot water with Gavin Newsom being the ringleader. So the thing you need to take away from this drops on the second when absolutely nobody is paying attention to this, but Gavin Newsom is completely aware of this entire situation, and he keeps lying. That's the thing that's so amazing to me. He's still out here. He knows exactly what's occurring. He knows that the Biden DOJ initiated an FBI investigation into him. He knows that they had a mole inside of his administration wearing a wire. But what he's doing is he's lying about the origination of the probe. He is fundraising today. As you're sitting here listening to this, Gavin Newsom is fundraising that Donald Trump is attacking him politically with the Department of Justice. He's fundraising off of a lie. And I guess here we have yet again another inversion of the truth coming from the Democrat Party. It's the same thing over. The people claiming innocence are the perpetrators. In this whole canard that Donald Trump is going after his political opponents, Joe Biden initiated this. Gavin Newsom is the problem, not Donald Trump. The one that is lying here is Gavin Newsom. And you got to have to keep watching this story because there's going to be more and more that's... The FBI doesn't put wiretaps on people with moles in administrations if there's not serious stuff occurring, especially if it's your own political party. And to think about it through that, look, Gavin Newsom is finished politically. He is totally finished. This guy, on top of presiding over a disaster of a state, he has the FBI putting a mole with a wire inside of his own orbit. That's the final straw, man. There is too much baggage with this guy. There are too many lies. There are too few results. And I guess good. He should never be in a leadership position ever, at any level, ever, anywhere. I mean, I guess he could be the leader of Cell Block 6 or maybe like the leader of his chain gang when they're breaking rocks in the hot sun. But it's just, I just wanted to make a note of it because we were down there talking to these friends of ours over the weekend. I go, do you see this whole thing about the mole and the wire? And they're like, no, I didn't even see it. Nobody's paying attention. There's nobody paying attention, but I guarantee you there'll be more information coming out about that probe. So keep watching it. So another quick hit. I saw this quick election forecast and I wanted to go ahead and dive into it real quick because I think it's interesting looking at that trend line. Like where are we going coming as the midterms approach? I have been saying all along, there was this national idea that the Democrat Party was just going to sweep back into power in the Senate and the Congress because everybody in the United States is so sick of Donald Trump. And of course, that's just more media lying, right? So I've been saying pretty consistently on the show that all of these Senate seats, congressional seats, they're going to start trending red before the midterms. There's just too much positive momentum occurring in culture, in the news, for me to think otherwise. And if you look at it, I talked about a week or two ago, right now, blue is going to lose the Senate. The blue ceiling in the Senate is 48. with 45 expected. So it would be a 55 red, 45 blue in the Senate if the projections hold currently. So that's going to get worse for them too, by the way. Well, now we're starting to see data coming out about Congress. So red is trending now too in Congress. And that was the one that blue thought they were going to win that. You keep hearing liberal pundits keep saying that Congress is going to go back to the Democrat Party, and that is not bearing out. So far on the midterms in Congress, red is projected to have 211. So in the midterm, after the midterms, red is projected to have 211 seats. Blue is projected to have 205 seats. Now, obviously, you have more seats available in Congress, so you have 19 toss-ups. So 211 red, 205 blue with 19 toss-ups. What you need to remember is you need 218 to have a majority in Congress. So you've got red projected at 211 with 19 toss-ups, which means that you only need 8 out of the 19 for red to hold the House. That would prevent a Majority Leader Hakeem Jeffries that would impeach Donald Trump day one. Now, that is an average poll. If you look at other projections, there are other projections out there that have red coming in at 215. So you'd have red at 215 with 10 toss-ups. So if you look at it through that modeling, the math gets even better. And I think as people process, I was thinking about this when I was kind of queuing up this whole conversation about the projections for Congress now. I think as people process this hard left communist swing that initiated last Tuesday night in New York, I think this is going to improve. Again, I think you just have so much momentum behind red. And look, again, I think anybody that listens to this show, I don't like the Republican Party either. But the Republican Party is your only sober choice. We cannot have communists taking over power that want to open the border back up and start throwing their political opponents in jail. Period. End of discussion. So red is the only sober choice. So your best bet is to reform the Republican Party. And I think most normal people, like in mid-America, that are average blue dog Democrats, they're sitting here watching a hard left communist swing in their own party, probably in utter horror. So if you're a normal person, a normal Democrat that the party has been left you behind, your situation is going to become more dire over the next few months. And again, you are only 1 week away from having 3 Muslim communists elected in New York City in congressional primaries. And it wasn't just the 3 communists in New York City. There was another communist that was elected in Denver. Another abolished the police, tear down no borders, Medicare for all person, one in Denver. So you now have 4 Democrat socialist Congress people that'll end up in Congress in the fall. That reality is going to become more stark to the average voter. And the blue candidates that the Democrat Party is putting out are getting even worse. So I think the longer this election cycle goes on, the worse this is going to get for blue. And let me just give you something to look at. Look at Michigan. The state of Michigan has an open Senate seat, and there are 3 people in the Democrat primary running for this seat. So 3 people running in the Democrat primary in Michigan for this open seat. The current leader of those 3 people, the leader in the clubhouse right now for the Michigan Senate seat is a guy named Abdul El Said. Abdul El Said is a Muslim Islamic socialist. He is currently at 35% trend in that primary. He is 6 points above his closest competitor. If you need nothing else to tell you that socialism and communism is a beating heart of the Democrat Party, that should tell you it. Abdul El Said is going to win in Michigan primary democratically. You might be curious. Here are his positions. Abdul El Said's positions in Michigan are he wants to surge taxes federally and at the state level in Michigan. He wants to ban ICE and he wants Medicare for all. It's just it's just the commie Christmas list. But when you look at it broadly, these are the emerging candidates. I can guarantee you, unless you're way into politics, most people are not digging into like who the candidates are today. Like, I would imagine most Michigan voters are not really dug into, like, who are the candidates, what's going on. They're not really voting in the primary. But what's going to happen is, quite frankly, I hope Abdul El Said wins. If he wins the Democrat primary, what's going to happen is that the Republican guy, who's a moderate, is going to look a lot more palatable to a moderate blue voter. Because that blue voter that has their head in the sand, that's not paying attention to what the Democrat Party is doing, is all of a sudden going to wake up about 60 days outside of the November elections and go, gee whiz, there's a Muslim communist running for Senate in the state of Michigan. So I've either got to decide, do I hate Donald Trump and I want to destroy my children's future, or do I want to swallow my pride and vote for a Republican candidate, as loathsome as that might be? And I think your answer is they're going to pull the lever for the Republican because, again, it's sober choices. If you're pulling a lever for a Muslim communist, you got major problems. And I talk about it in the show before. People are not ready for this. This whole socialism angle, communist angle, the rise of democratic socialism inside of the party, this has not hit the general consciousness net yet. You've got to be way into politics to be following that stuff. And what'll happen is the intentions become clear here, you're going to have a lot more blue moderates leaving the party. So again, you're 1 week away. Give that a couple more months. You're 1 week away from New York. 1 week away from Denver. You give this a couple more months when this whole agenda of Democrat socialism on its way to communism unfolds. It's going to get a lot worse for blue, but you need to be watching that watch Michigan very closely, because trust me, I will be. So there was one last thing I wanted to hit on just as a quick hit. I saw this and I wanted to comment on it because it just blew my mind. So apparently there is a magazine out there named Essence. And as a side note, I am absolutely flabbergasted that magazines still exist in the world, but I guess I'm just too old and I don't understand anything. But you have a magazine that is still currently published called Essence. And you might be curious what Essence talks about or who it targets. So Essence is targeted at Black women. So it's like a monthly lifestyle magazine for Black women. And it looks at topics like beauty, culture, entertainment, things like that. So Essence magazine just put out its June edition. And normally I wouldn't care about this at all, but that edition has a Supreme Court justice on the cover. And the Supreme Court justice would be Justice Jackson. So here you have Ketanji Brown Jackson on the cover of a magazine. This lady is wearing a purple suit and a huge smile, and the quote on it is what stood out to me. The quote on this magazine is Ketanji Brown Jackson, the people's champion. Look, if you look at that and you're not appalled, there's a problem. This lady, Justice Jackson, she's on magazine covers. She's doing Broadway shows. That is not a serious thing. This lady, Justice Jackson, is a Supreme Court justice. Her job, her core function historically, temporally, whatever you want to say, her job is to interpret the law. Her job is to safeguard the Constitution, to restrain the government, and to protect the people. She is not a politician. She is not Michelle Obama. Justice Jackson's job is not to make law. That is not her purpose. Her job is not to be the people's champion. But of course, here she is letting this go. This cover, things like the Broadway show that she participated in, things like that stain the court. And it dumbs down our system. Can you imagine? Justices, judges aren't champions of anything. Their only championship should be fidelity to the law. This isn't some like baseball card deal where you're collecting your favorite players. It's like if you're like a Blue Jersey fan, you're collecting the full set of Blue Jersey Democrat judges. And the thing that I find really appalling about this This entire thing with her being on magazine covers talking about the People's Championship or People's Champion, it makes it very plain what her role is in this entire charade that we have in social media. Her role is not serious jurisprudence. What it is, it's being a liberal activist and a social activist. And the thing that I think is even more ridiculous about this whole thing is the compartmentalization of the demographic. She is sitting here on the cover of an African American woman magazine. It's always with the identity politics. And I'm sure if you read the article, they talk about democracy. But putting a black lady justice on a black woman's magazine just further deepens this divide that they're racial partisans. That's like having Sonia Sotomayor on a Latin women's magazine, or I guess Amy Coney Barrett like on a white suburban housewife magazine. It's equally inappropriate no matter which way you cut it. But I saw this whole cover come out, and to me it's just so obvious and it's so tiresome. But you really wish a person like Justice Jackson would stick to the law. But she's not sticking to the law. She's a celebrity now. And she's somebody to be celebrated, and it's just a total joke. Anyway, I saw it, and it just made me mental. So, switching gears, when I was down visiting with friends over the weekend, I was talking to my host, and he was talking to me about the Battle of Attu, and he had never heard of that before. The Battle of Attu was the Aleutian Islands campaign where Japan had invaded the Aleutian Islands, and unfortunately, the American army had to go up there and wipe them out. But I kept thinking about who ordered that. Like, as I was driving back on Sunday, I was thinking about all that whole Battle of Attu. And I was thinking about Admiral Yamamoto, because Admiral Yamamoto is the one that ordered that whole thing. Admiral Yamamoto was the commander of the Japanese Pacific Fleet. He's the one that sent those guys to the Aleutian Islands. And I kept thinking about the Yamamoto assassination in World War II. And I had actually written a story maybe like a couple months ago, kind of as a companion piece to the Yamamoto assassination that I had talked about. That was Operation Vengeance. And if you'll remember, Yamamoto was killed because the American military had broken codes of the Japanese, and they knew exactly where Yamamoto would be, and they killed him. Well, I kept thinking about that story in Yamamoto, and I was like, man, I had this story that I wrote, and I'm like, you know what, I need to get that out there. So I wanted to go ahead and talk about a similar story to Operation Vengeance, which would be the Doolittle Raid. Now, that's probably something you never heard of before. So what was the Doolittle Raid? Well, the Doolittle Raid, this was this raid that occurred, and the idea for it started right after Pearl Harbor. So think about Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor happened. It is totally shocking to the American population. America is just in a state of shock right after Pearl Harbor. Well, obviously, too, when Pearl Harbor occurred, the United States, that was what initiated America getting into World War II. Well, right when America got into World War II, the outcome of the war was very much in doubt. So nobody really knows where this is going to go after Pearl Harbor occurs. So what happened is after Pearl Harbor, FDR met with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Well, it was FDR's position right after Pearl Harbor. He wanted Japan bombed immediately. He said, they hit us, we're going to hit them. Japan must be bombed. Well, FDR had another motive for that. FDR wanted Japan bombed not just as retaliation, but he also wanted to sow doubt in the Japanese people. He wanted to show them that they could be touched. Because again, the thought of somebody bombing America was like an alien concept. That bombing scared Americans to death. I'm like, oh my God, the war hit home. FDR wanted to show that back to the Japanese people. He wanted to show the Japanese people, you hit us, now we're going to hit you. He had another reason for doing it. FDR thought that if we bombed the Japanese right away, that it would be good for U.S. morale. It would make Americans realize we're in a war, they punch us, we're going to punch them right back. So this whole concept of FDR bombing Japan kept percolating inside of the U.S. military. So what happened is that they started looking at contingencies for bombing Japan right away. Well, what happened was there was this guy named Jimmy Doolittle. They tapped this guy, Jimmy Doolittle, to plan. They asked him to plan an attack on the Japanese mainland for bombing. So who was Jimmy Doolittle? Doolittle was a U.S. pilot. He was a commander in the military. So what happened was they said, okay, we want you to plan a hypothetical attack. So Doolittle is then tasked with picking the aircraft for a long bombing run. He's in charge of getting all the data together, compiling what an attack would look like. Well, obviously, there's a problem there because if you're going to pick out an aircraft to fly to hit Japan, you're going to need something that can fly an awfully long way. So, what Doolittle figured out is that for the closest runway for them to do this, they would need a bomber to fly 2,400 nautical miles, 2,400 nautical miles with 2,000-pound bombs. So, obviously, you have to fit all of the logistics that are needed, plus the ordnance and all the other things, and then map this whole thing out. Well, Doolittle ended up picking the B-25. So they decide to go through with this. Doolittle maps the whole thing out, and he goes, okay, let's go ahead and do it. FDR looked at it, the Joint Chiefs of Staff looked at it and said, you know what, we're going to do it. So they decide to go ahead and pick the B-25. They take Doolittle's recommendation. What the American military did is they loaded up 16 B-25s and they put them on 2 aircraft carriers. Because again, you need a runway. How are you going to do this? So the 2 aircraft carriers that they used were the Hornet and the Enterprise. So again, 16 B-25s on 2 aircraft carriers, the Hornet and the Enterprise. They start sending them out. So those aircraft carriers were accompanied by 3 heavy cruisers, 1 light cruiser, and 8 destroyers. So that task force is put together to go bomb Japan immediately after Pearl Harbor. That task force was then assembled north of Hawaii. So FDR gives the word, we're going to execute this Doolittle plan. So that entire task force then went radio silent after they got together. They went radio silent and then sailed east towards Japan. Pardon me, west, I guess. It'd be west towards Japan. So here they are going towards Japan. So the entire armada, so you have this floating armada going west out of Hawaii towards Japan. They need to get as close as possible to launch these things to go 2,400 nautical miles. What happened was, though, is that they were spotted by Japanese military agents. They were spotted about 650 nautical miles outside of Japan. So they're spotted by this Japanese vessel that they ended up going in and attacking, and they sank it. So they're spotted and they sank it. But the problem with it is that they didn't know whether or not the Japanese had gotten a warning off. So these guys are like, we don't know if our cover's blown. We don't know if this guy was able to transmit a radio signal back out. So what happened was that the commanders on the aircraft carriers, Doolittle was with them. So what they decided to do, they're on the aircraft carriers. They don't know if their position's been given away or not. 650 nautical miles out, they decide to launch early. They decided to launch early in case a radio signal got out that would compromise their position. So what happened was that off the aircraft carriers, they launched 10 hours early. So they launched 10 hours earlier than they had planned. And the problem with it is the logistical problem, the mathematical problem is they launched 170 nautical miles farther away than they planned. So you had multiple issues here. First of all, they're too far away. They need to carry all this ordnance. They need to go all this way. They're too far out. It's too early. The other problem was even more practical. You're talking about a B-25 lifting off an aircraft carrier. This has never been tried before. So again, they got 16 B-25s that have never taken off an aircraft carrier ever before in human history. So these daring men load everything up and they go ahead and launch the plan. These daring men all got the birds off the carrier. So they're able to do this like logistical feat. They got all the B-25s off without an incident that had never happened before. So now what's occurring is you have 16 aircraft, you have 16 B-25s. They're now flying to bomb Japan. Well, these guys go without incident. The aircraft flew over Japan and they started bombing. Now, the thing you got to realize, they were not in like some kind of formation. They weren't flying together or anything like that. They had flown as pairs or in fours. So the whole task force of B-25s had separated. Well, and by the time they got over Japan, the Japanese mainland, they were all alone. So you've got 16 bombers going 16 different ways over Japan. So what did they do? These 16 B-25s hit Tokyo, Yokohama, Kobe, and a few other targets. They were all industrial military targets. Well, remember what I said about nautical miles, ordnance, all these other things. The problem for these guys now is obvious, and that problem is fuel. And the problem isn't just fuel, it's landing. Well, one plane went to Russia immediately because it was too low on fuel. Well, what did the other 15 do? The other 15 headed towards China. So the plan then was to land in China. They would land in China, they would refuel. But the whole problem with it is this early launch, the fact that they launched 10 hours early and 175 nautical miles away or too early, that early launch killed this whole plan to land in China. So these brave men, these bombers, are flying over Japan. They expend their ordnance. Now they're dealing with low fuel. And the other problem is bad weather set in. All 15 planes crash landed or the crews ditched. You only had one plane that landed, and that was the one that went to Russia. So you had all these men that basically went off in planes to bomb Japan, and every single plane crashed. These men had absolutely no fuel left and could not go farther. So 15 out of 16 planes crashed. Now, China, the Chinese military, was able to rescue a lot of these men. But 2 of the crews, 10 men, were completely missing in action. You had 8 men captured by the Japanese, and 3 of those men that were captured were executed. So the other 5 men, they were liberated in August of 1945. So they're like in captivity for 2 years with the Japanese. So there were only 3 men that were confirmed KIA in the raid, meaning they'd been hit with shrapnel, bullet, etc. But the raid eventually was complete. Japan had been bombed. The problem with all this, with the Doolittle Raid, is that the damage that was done to the targets was very, very weak. So you had very weak results. You lost 15 planes. The results of this whole thing were so bad that Doolittle thought he'd be court-martialed for a failure. The funny thing about that, he was that embarrassed by the results of this. The funny thing about it, he was actually awarded a Medal of Honor. He was awarded a Medal of Honor and promoted to Brigadier General. Why? The raid itself, the Doolittle Raid itself, was huge for U.S. morale, so FDR was right. The United States population was very, very energized by the raid. Well, conversely, the Japanese were absolutely furious. The Japanese media, after the U.S. did this bombing in the Doolittle Raid, the media in Japan spun this whole thing as like treachery to Japan. And what they did is they started making up propaganda. They were reporting to their own population that the Americans had bombed civilians, when in fact that did not occur. Well, the other thing that came out of this whole thing is that the Doolittle Raid was also a black eye on the Japanese Navy. The question then became to the Japanese population, how could the Japanese Navy allow this armada to penetrate them so closely? The other problem Japan had coming out of this is Japan now knew that the U.S. could hit their mainland. So this whole Doolittle Raid caused this like entire escalation of tensions between the two nations. The U.S., after the Doolittle Raid, actually feared retaliation by the Japanese. There was a very big concern coming out of the Doolittle Raid that the West Coast would be hit. So you actually had military defenses being built on the West Coast. Now, the final takeaway from the whole Doolittle Raid was Yamamoto himself, Admiral Yamamoto. Yamamoto knew at that point that he had to destroy the U.S. Navy. He had to sink the U.S. carrier fleet. Well, he failed in that objective at Pearl Harbor, so what did he start planning? He started planning Midway because of it. And what occurred, Yamamoto set a trap for the Americans at Midway. And that attack at Midway happened a few weeks later after the after the Doolittle Raid. Well, the interesting thing about that is this whole thing about Doolittle Raid, Yamamoto needing a win, knowing he needed to destroy the U.S. Navy, that led him to make a tactical mistake at Midway. And the loss at Midway ended Japan's ability to win that war. The Japanese loss at Midway was the turning point of World War II in the Pacific Theater. So I guess if you distill this whole thing down into brass tacks, The Doolittle Raid was a major event in World War II, and it really speaks to the psychology of the war. It speaks to the psychology of war and propaganda that states use to militarize their people. But the Doolittle Raid was the first aerial attack on Japan. And obviously, if you look at it, like the bombing of Tokyo, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki, those are obviously much more controversial. But here you had Doolittle's Raid that was kind of this forgotten part because you had it sandwiched between Pearl Harbor and Midway and all the other insanity that was occurring in European theater. But how brave are these pilots taking? They didn't even know if they could get off the aircraft carrier. Going 2,400 nautical miles with 2,000-pound bombs and then having to launch 170, 175 nautical miles away because your cover was blown. You knew you're never going to land your plane. 15 out of 16 planes crash landed. How brave are these men? Just absolutely. And the thing that's crazy about it is that is a completely forgotten story of World War II. But thank God for all those brave men. So switching gears, the last 10 to 15 years have really given you some jarring videos. And jarring's a good word for it, things you've never seen before. And with all the insane things that you've seen over the last few years, there's one that really stands out to me. And to me, the hardest part of the last 10 to 15 years was watching the border get overwhelmed. And it wasn't overwhelmed, it was being overrun. I don't remember a more helpless feeling. It's like watching your home be invaded and you can't do anything about it. And invaded is really the right word for all this. The whole thing that happened at the border was a manufactured crisis. It was a manufactured crisis by the Biden administration. The thing that bothered me the most about it is that protecting the border is a core function of the executive. It's a core function of any administration, but it is really a core function of the president. And really, a core function of any nation is defending its own border. And I'm not aware of any precedent in history like that. Rome didn't open up their border to the foreign horde. China doesn't allow it now. Like, have you ever heard of a nation state on earth that allowed its borders to be overrun like that survived? You had tens of millions of non-citizens flooding our border, storming it. And the thing I thought was so jarring about, so I'm sitting at home watching this, watching my home get invaded. And the thing that bothered me the most about it is that it was portrayed in the media, if you are alarmed by that situation, you are alarmed by that assault, you're some kind of racist nationalist. And this refrain of, well, don't you know that we're a nation of immigrants, is so ridiculous. It was obscene. And the thing that I kept thinking about when all these people are storming over the border, my main thought was always, how many men died for this land? How many men died for this soil? Men bled and died for this soil and our flag, and it was given away cheaply by these just charlatans in the Biden administration. You're conceding your birthright. You're conceding your gift. But I guess beyond the revulsion that I have, this act of this invasion that was occurring, I had more practical concerns beyond like the invasion that I was witnessing. My question at that time, when this is occurring and you have all these millions of people storming the border, the question is totally practical. Like, where are these people sleeping? Where are they eating? How are they going to get water? Where are they going to go to the bathroom? We were told none of this stuff matters. And we were doing everything in a humane manner. We're a nation of plenty. We can take care of these wretched souls seeking freedom. Well, of course, everybody knows what happened. These invaders were welcomed in, and they weren't deported back out. They were given food, health care, lodging, and then they were dumped all over our country. You had illegal invaders that their first act was breaking our laws. They were bussed, flown, and transported all over the country. So now what we had is we had 20 to 30 million new mouths to feed that were all provided by social services. You had 20 to 30 million people that now need social services and they need shelter. Well, of course, what happened was obvious. The federal government then at that point, after they spread these people out all over hell's half acre, started dumping tax money into cities and states. And of course, all the sanctuary states and cities were thrilled. New York, California, Illinois. They're more than happy to take all that money from the federal. So last year, so what is the practical impact of that? Last year alone, so 2025, the federal government paid $150 billion in social services to illegals. $150 billion. And I guess to the liberal mind, that is money we owed. The U.S. owes that money to right historical wrongs, to atone for our colonial malfeasance. The problem with this thought process and giving $150 billion away to illegals, the problem is, who does that ultimately impact? Because I can promise you the thing that they keep ignoring about this, when you take $150 billion of tax money and divert it to illegals, what's happening is that impacts low-income legacy citizens the worst. It impacts the people that Democrats claim to represent, the poor and the downtrodden, mainly minorities. And the demographic that's hurt the most by this, Black people. Black American citizens are absolutely negatively impacted by this illegal immigration and the federal government diverting $150 billion into these coffers. It's a math equation. 27% of people on social services in the United States of America are Black. So for easy math, just say that 25% of social services go to the Black community. So 1 out of every $4 goes to the Black community. So if you have a $4 billion budget, the Black population would get $1 billion of that for easy math. Well, the problem with that is that when you inject 20 to 30 million people into that equation, what happens? You're diluting the pie. You're diluting the amount of money that can be given out. So again, with more mouths to feed and a capped budget, you now have a dilution of social services. So less money is now available to Black U.S. citizens. And the question is why? Because the illegals are drinking that milkshake. The illegals are drinking the milkshake of legacy American citizens, Black, white, it doesn't matter. And the response here is obvious from the liberal mind, which the obvious response is, well, we need more money then. We have to increase the size of the coffer to offset the amount of people that we just dumped onto this. You either raise taxes to create a bigger pie for people to draw off of, or you're going to get a federal subsidy, and that $150 billion is the federal subsidy. And the problem with it is there's no limit on that now. There's no end date. There's no expiration date on when these mouths aren't going to need food. They're still going to need water. They're still going to need housing. That's just last year. Because without employment, these 20, 30 million illegals are forever on the dole. And they're not citizens, so they're not eligible to be employed. And I guess if you distill this whole issue down, what it means to the average person is that the government created a problem and then provided a solution. And that's what governments do. They create a problem, and then they propose a solution to the problem that they created. And I can tell you as a student of history and political science, invariably the solution to the problem that they created is more government. That is exactly how governments accrue power. And the problem with the horrible thing about this is they're physically here. So this isn't some kind of abstract problem. We are going to have major issues for decades in this country because of what Biden and his just sycophants did. And the only thing I know for certain is that mass illegal immigration is going to be worse for this country than any war ever was. And now the data is starting to bear this out. So Fox Business put out an article in the New York Post the other day, and this article itself is from the Federal Reserve. And this paper that's coming out of the Federal Reserve is absolutely damning on the Biden administration and anybody that supported this lunacy. What it did is it looked at how illegal immigration affected local and labor housing markets. And the conclusions, if you're listening, you can imagine that the conclusions that the Fed drew were pretty obvious. Illegal immigration caused a 30% rise in home prices. Illegal immigration caused a 30% rise in home prices, and it also caused a 20% growth rate in rental prices. So 30% rise in home prices and 20% rise in rental costs. And the reason why is that homes and apartments are limited. That is a supply and demand issue. If you have X amount of homes and Y amount of people, but then you inject more on the Y side, you're going to have an imbalance. That's supply side economics. You have a surplus of people with a limited inventory of available roofs. And the problem with it is then if you have a limited supply of roofs, then having a roof just got more expensive. And of course, anybody that knows anything, that knows how to add, knows this. With a 20 to 30 million person increase, you're going to need more homes. And the question, again, you might want to ask yourself is, great, if you're a homeowner, you go, well, great, my house just went up 30%. If you're a landlord charging rent to people, like, great, I'm making more money. The problem with it is it's not all about the homeowner and the landlord. This situation materially hurts our kids, American kids, Gen Z especially. Gen Z cannot afford homes. They can't afford homes. They have student debt out of the yin yang. They have vehicle costs, phone costs. Even if they go to McDonald's, it's $40 at McDonald's. They can't afford anything, and they can't create any equity to buy a home, which was the greatest enabler of the middle class. Well, what happens is they already couldn't afford homes, and then what happened is that home prices just went up another 30%, which pushes the dream of home ownership even further away. So homes for your kids, if you have a Gen Z kid, a home for your kid was hard before, and now it's even harder. We said, well, okay, so what? So they don't own a home. What's the big deal? Well, they rent. If they don't own a home, they rent. Well, guess what? Their rent went up 20%. And guess what? They get no equity in a rental, so they're getting smoked every which way but lose. So they can't buy a home. Home ownership is totally out of reach, and now they're getting a 20% larger bill in their rental a month for something they have no equity on. That dilution of the dollar hurts them again. And again, I mentioned it a minute ago, this whole process, if they have to spend 20% more in rent, guess what? They have less money to save to actually buy a home at one point in their lives. And not only do they have less money to buy a home, but they also have a reduced ability to buy assets. If you're spending your money on rent that's just flying out the window, you're not buying a stock, you're not buying a car, you're not buying a watch, you're not buying a gun. So yet again, our politicians, specifically Democrats in this case, hurt children. Because to be clear, we didn't hurt kids, Biden and his administration did. The sycophants in the Democrat Party that supported this lunacy, they did this. And I was reading this whole thing last night, and I'm sitting here looking at this, and again, lens of COVID. We sat here in COVID and destroyed our young people to protect the old and the sick. It's the first time ever in human history we sacrificed the young for the elderly and the sick. COVID policies and rules materially harm that demographic. These were rules, policies that kept masks on children, limited their social development, delayed their academics, destroyed their academic potential. Those policies of COVID were celebrated by Democrats and liberals. They painted themselves in COVID as protectors of the realm, the guardians of the science. Those are the same people in COVID that were celebrating this invasion. And the problem that I have with it, with COVID, this invasion at the border, these are things I can't get back. And what these folks did is they laid my kid's future on the altar of their religion. And their religion is their own morality. And it's morality of the moment. Because in the moment, they view themselves as 1,000% correct. Because in the moment when they're allowing tens of millions of invaders into my home, their emotional choice at that moment is sympathy for the invader. It's never looking at the bouncing ball logic behind that. It's the psychosis of the moment, the morality of the moment. It's the emotional choice of forcing a kid into a mask when that kid has a learning disability. It's the same thought process. And the problem with that captured emotion at the moment is that the logical choice, the people that think logically, they say, what happens next? The emotional person doesn't do that. And I guess my point with this mentality is the same. COVID and the illegal immigration are two sides of the same coin. They're bumper sticker politics for the emotional people in the United States. I think about Obamacare a lot. I think about the Obamacare argument all the time. It's interesting to me because this isn't isolated to COVID. It's not isolated to the border. The Obamacare argument, and I was in healthcare at the time. Obamacare, when it was being proposed, nobody could explain to you what the individual mandate meant. Nobody. And you would have these people breathlessly talking about MSNBC, CNN. They had absolutely no idea what they're talking. They're talking about a Ponzi scheme. So here you have this idea that the federal government is now going to overhaul 20% of the U.S. economy and put it under centralized government planning. An emotional person, this emotional liberalism, this emotional decision, an emotional person reads this and says, oh, well, we're going to get Obamacare. Yay, that's free healthcare. That's nice. That's a nice thing. Or they could say, it's a nice thing to say, oh, well, healthcare is a human right. Right? Healthcare is a human right. How wonderful is this? So emotionally, it feels good. You're going to give people something they don't have. That's an emotional decision. A logical person who would probably be a conservative, a logical person goes, okay, I understand what you're talking about Obamacare, but how exactly will this work? How exactly are we going to pay for it? How are we going to subsidize it? How are we going to distribute it? If you're really going down that logic chain, a logical person sits there and says, what business does the government have administering healthcare? A logical person would say, are we creating socialized medicine in a free country? The problem with it is these logical points, the conservative argument, these logical points are overwhelmed by the emotional bloodletting class. How dare you ask these questions? Don't you know healthcare is a human right? If you don't want free healthcare for everybody and you don't want to pay for it, then you're an oppressor. You're perpetuating class warfare. Well, guess what? We had a debate. We had a debate about Obamacare, and guess what? The emotional people won. The emotional people won. They got what they wanted. They got their shiny object. Obama forced it through. There were 0 Republican votes. It had to go to the Supreme Court, where Justice John Roberts made it something it wasn't. And I guess my question is, so you have this argument between the emotional class and the logical class. Obamacare passes, much to the chagrin of the logical class. And I guess my question is, how's that program working out for everybody? How's Obamacare working out? It's working out so great that we had a government shutdown for about 60 days while we were arguing about subsidizing this program. That program is working out so great that we're robbing Peter to pay Paul. And the problem with it is Obamacare, we're less than 20 years in on this. Obamacare is upside down now. Obamacare is driving our deficits and debt. It is a black hole of money. And you want to know the problem with this? And this isn't really about Obamacare. The main problem with it, with Obamacare, just as a specific, the same people that wanted Obamacare are the same people now claiming that it's broken and needs fixing. And it's like, you broke it. Democrats and the Democrat people, the emotional argument, they own the broken healthcare system in the United States 1,000%. This is what they wanted. They wanted this. 0 Republican votes. The program doesn't work, and now they want to fix it again. And I guess if you look at what your money goes to today, healthcare is unaffordable today because politicians made it unaffordable 20 years ago. And this is the same thing that's occurring with COVID and with the border. So you see all these rising costs of getting a roof, 30% rise in home prices, 20% rise in rental costs. And what are Democrats talking about now? They're talking about freezing rent. The Democrat Party's position nationally, they're talking about affordable healthcare, they're talking about home prices, and their keyword is affordability. They destroyed the healthcare system. They destroyed the home market. How does diluting money for the poorest among us help affordability? The thing that's so interesting to me is they paint themselves as the people's champion on home prices. They're doing this right now. They're doing this right now. They're talking about, well, if we're in charge, we'll figure out how to lower home prices. We'll figure out how to do all this stuff. If they were in charge, they're arguing right now that if they were in charge, homes would be affordable. It's a stick. It's a total stick. It's Charlie Brown in the football. Abigail Spanberger ran on affordability in Virginia. That's the rallying cry. She ran on affordability, and what did she do when she got into power? She passed how many new laws? She passed how many new taxes? It is jacking up the rates on the Amazon packages that delivered your every single one of them. Is that making your life more or less affordable? Affordability is the Democrat 2026 rallying cry. If you hear that from anybody, if you hear anybody in the Democrat Party or the emotional class talking to you about affordability, laugh in their face. They gave you higher healthcare costs because of Obamacare. Now they're giving you higher home prices. They're giving you higher rents. They did that. Democrat policies created this problem. And what they're telling you is now they just need power again to fix the problem that they created initially. And it's another problem with this. Sober conservatives warned that this would happen. If you were sober and looking what was going on with Obamacare, sober and looking what was going on with this invasion of the border, if you hold your emotions aside and look at things pragmatically, you called it correctly. It's the difference between thinkers and feelers, and that's the dynamic. You have conservatives that are thinkers, and you have people that are feelers. They don't understand law. They don't understand history. They don't understand that they're the ones that caused the problem. And I guess if you're a Gen Z kid, just thinking, if you're a Gen Z kid, can you imagine even voting for a Democrat? Because if I'm a Gen Z person, you really need to thank the Democrat Party and all these emotional people in our government for your high cost of living. Not only thank the Democrat Party, you might as well go ahead and say hello to your new neighbor. Your new neighbor is an MS-13 gang member who's running a fentanyl operation. He's just seeking a better life. So you better get friendly with your new neighbor. And the funny thing about it is like the liberal media wants to act like that MS-13 gang member that's pumping fentanyl into your school district is just the same as Miles Standish off the Mayflower. The whole thing's just mind-blowing. And it's funny, even if you go beyond this stuff with like what's going on with this invasion on the U.S. shores, that invasion was orchestrated across Canada and Europe. You had France, England, the Netherlands. You had all these Western countries being legally invaded. They were being legally invaded, and it happened all at the same time. The politician class, the expert class, right and left, let these people in. And a great example of this whole invasion thing is Spain. I saw this, it blew my mind. So listen to these numbers. So in the year 2000, so 26 years ago, Spain had 1 out of every 20 residents was foreign born. So 26 years ago, 1 out of every 20 people in Spain was foreign born. That ratio today is 1 in 5. So to be completely clear, 20% of Spain, the people that exist in Spain right now are foreign born. 20% of the population is not Spanish. 20% of the population that isn't Spanish, and they're breeding like rabbits. And the obvious question then becomes, what happens when the percentage hits 51%? If you have a foreign-born population that is not naturalized Spanish, and they are the majority in the country, the question you ask yourself, is Spain even Spain? And Spain is doing something that France, England, and the United States are not doing, which is amnesty. Spain is legalizing these people. They are on their seventh wave of amnesty. And you might be curious, the ruling government in Spain is all socialist. So this socialist government of Spain allowed these people in, paid for them, and then they legalized them. And what is occurring is those new people, the new Spaniards, they are overwhelming the legacy Spaniard people right now. And I'm assuming what would happen is the Spanish socialist would tell you that these new people that came in are just as Spanish as apple pie. This whole thing is totally absurd. And not only is it absurd, it's obvious. What happened is that the globalists struck at the soft underbelly of Western civilization. They found legal loopholes for perpetual globalist socialist rule. They found weak voting structures, they found weak politicians, and they abused our immigration laws. They're abusing the voting laws to overthrow these governments. I think that's the best way. You're being invaded legally. Every Western country invaded. Voting and social services overwhelmed. It was all coordinated, and it was all coordinated by people that are very short-sighted. Because the question is, how did this invasion at Spain, United States, England, France, how did it help the citizen? And let me ask you a better question. How did the illegal invasion at the border help you as an American citizen? How did it help our youth? How did it help our children? How did it help Gen Z? And the question you might want to ask yourself is, what does Gen Z really think about that? What does Gen Z think about everything that's going on around them? Higher rent, unaffordable college. They're locked out of the American dream in a lot of ways. Well, there's new data that came out on top of everything else. There's new data out about the Gen Z perspective. And the data, I was looking at, it's shocking. So a Marist poll just showed this. Get ready for this. 60% of Gen Z believe Americans will have to resort to violence to get the country back on track. 60% of Gen Z believes violence is needed to correct the country. It doesn't stop there. You ready for this? So 60% of Gen Z believe violence is necessary. Guess what? 46% of millennials agree with that. 46% of millennials think violence is needed in this country. How about Gen X? You curious? Gen X, 35% of Gen X thinks violence is necessary to save the country. Boomers, 20%. Man, 60% of kids under the age of 30, that demographic, I think it's 15 to 30 is Gen Z. And 60% of these kids that are totally locked out of the American dream, they're locked out of the capitalist system, they think violence is necessary to get the country back on track. Look, man, the trends that were occurring in U.S. society before COVID were bad. And then this idea of unchecked immigration was like throwing gasoline on a fire. There is not one metric you can look at from a practical standpoint that was improved by adding 20 to 30 million invaders on it. Not one metric was made more positive. And the problem with it is now you have a plurality of our young people who, if you think violence is necessary, you're not seeing a bright future. And what I would argue is that Gen Z is seeing the writing on the wall. 60% of those kids think violence is necessary. And I've said it before on the show, you are going to see populist right-wing nationalism, or you're going to see communism. And this is all the result of the actions that this administration took. Those kids, and I talk to them, man, those kids want like a Franco. They want like a Napoleon because they see the system is not fixable. They don't see it as fixable, and the problem with it is they're locked out of all the benefits of the system. In all of this with these kids, I have two kids that are it makes my heart hurt. We created a situation where their innocence was robbed in COVID, their educational advancement was robbed in COVID. We created a situation for our kids with the border and all this other stuff where these kids now think violence is needed. And violence, I guess, is needed because words have failed, and we put these kids in a bad spot. And I guess one last point here on who drove this bus. There was a quick poll that came out. The percentage of Americans who say they are proud or very proud to be an American. I thought this was fascinating. In 2001, this is you're proud or very proud to be an American. In 2001, respondents in red, 90% of them were proud or very proud to be an American. Blue was 85% proud or very proud to be an American. The numbers today in 2026, red is 92% proud or very proud to be an American. Blue is at 36 proud or very proud to be an American. You had a negative 56% drop for blue in that question. And I guess in that 25, 26 year period, you had American history demonized. You had DEI, woke, BLM, Juneteenth. The blue folks infected our youth and our culture with these radical concepts. They flooded education. That America was bad, and this is the result of all this. And I guess if you look at it from the bright side of all this stuff, blue is not having children. They're not having babies. If you hate a place, you're not going to bring a kid into that place. Childless cat ladies are not driving the growth of our population. Conservatives are outbreeding liberals. Man, these are just wild times. Anyway, I just thought this was so crazy. A 30% rise in home prices and a 20% rise in rent. Again, another they either unintended or intended, but that was the result that conservatives were claiming, and here we are, and we're living this nightmare. So anyway, I've gone super long. Guys, I want y'all to have a great week. Hopefully we'll get another shot by the end of the week. If you like the show, please go ahead and follow us on Spotify. You can also follow us on Instagram at Foggy Dew Daily. If you have questions for the show, please go ahead and email us at foggydew95@gmail.com. But in the meantime, I'd ask you to say a prayer, ask questions, and stay vigilant. This is the Foggy Dew, signing off.